Ladies and gentlemen, we were taught a lethal lie that in order to be loved, we must erase ourselves. That acceptance will come only when we mute our own voice. That worth is determined by how much of it we are willing to give away. This toxin, insidiously passed from one generation to the next, infiltrates the very fabric of our early education until many of us walk around with it as a second skin. There is a mysterious heritage that runs quietly through families, cultures, and whole civilizations, a buried message sewn into the soul before one knows how to challenge it. It tells one that in order to be loved, one must bend, shrink, and eventually vanish. That love is not freely given, but is won through self-sacrifice. And so, from an early age on, they learn to regard their own authenticity as risky, their uniqueness as something that menaces belonging. The price of love, we hear, is to mute the inner voice and comply with the dictates of others. But what is this love that flourishes only if one's very nature is withheld? What is this bond established upon the quelling of spirit? To confuse the stifling of the self for passion is to spoil both love and life itself, for within the perversion the heart is never beheld, and the soul is never fully wrapped. Rather, a disguise is welcomed as the living reality behind it withers. Think about how many bear this weight in secret. A child who discovers that obedience alone will buy love starts to conceal his wonder, his feralness, his raw fury. A woman who has been taught that her value is based on compliance mutes her voice until even she loses its sound. A man who mistakes strength for self-discipline dons a shell so heavy that it shatters from the inside out. In each instance, the self is entombed under layers of sacrifice, and what lies is a shadow of the human that could have been. But shadows do not disappear when they are ignored, they grow. They accompany us, muttering from the edges of our existence. In our dreams, our arguments, and our silent despair, the unlived self needs to be expressed, and when it is repressed, it turns against us. We experience it as bitterness, resentment, and emptiness. We confuse these emotions for destiny, but they are simply the echoes of our own betrayal. To understand this plainly is to understand the hard truth. The love that demands you betray yourself is not love at all. It is a pact with nothing. It is a consent to exist in bondage, yet call yourself free. And as long as you are willing to keep this delusion, you stay trapped in sacrifice and silence and pass on the same poison to the ones you bring into the world. But there is a different route. Real love, if it is worth the title, doesn't demand self-annihilation. It doesn't become stronger while you get weaker. Real love flourishes in the light of truth, in the space of two hearts willing to encounter each other as they are and not as they're instructed to be. It does not demand your erasure, but your arrival, your whole, damaged, shining you. When you risk standing in your own truth, when you risk revealing your desires, your contradictions, even your wounds, you do a revolutionary thing. You summon a love that does not attach to masks but attaches to reality. You invite the other not into your performance but into your being. And in doing this, you bring both yourself and the other more fully, more deeply, more honestly to life. This takes courage. For centuries, the illusion of sacrifice has been rewarded as loyalty, devotion, even sanctity. Breaking away from it somehow feels like betrayal. Betrayal of family, of cultural norms, or of the unspoken rules that bind us. But really, it is not betrayal, it is freedom. It is the recovery of life from the prison of false belonging. The work, therefore, is not to kill love, but to cleanse it. To sift the fake from the authentic. To decline the sort of affection that only works when you are broken and silent, and to develop instead the sort of love that will continue to grow when you are alive and whole. This is no easy work, for it calls on you to face the most fundamental conditioning of your own heart. It invites you to hear the voice that has been long hidden under the din of compliance. And yet, by taking this action, by opting for presence rather than sacrifice, authenticity rather than erasure, you not only restore your own life, you start to heal the collective wound. Because with every gesture of authenticity, ripples are sent out, instructing others by example that one can be loved without being erased, that one can be whole and still be held. Picture a world where children develop not in dread of rejection but in confidence to be seen. Picture relationships that are not constructed on bargains of silence but on the encounter of two unmasked souls. Picture love not as a delicate exchange of sacrifice but as a flame that burns brighter when both flames burn fully. This is the vision that shatters the cycle. It is not a dream of utopia, but a possibility lived if one is willing to step out beyond the illusion, if one is willing to challenge the poison masquerading as devotion. if one is willing to assert the simple truth, to be loved is not to forfeit the self, but to incarnate it. And so the challenge is yours, not tomorrow, not in the distant future, but now. Will you pursue the legacy of silence, or will you stand in your own presence? Will you hold to fake affection, or will you dare the risk and the beauty of real love? The option is not simple, but it is necessary, for the life you live and the love you offer rests on it. Love, in all its authenticity, is not a chain that suffocates, nor a weight that presses upon the soul. It is not a silent expectation that one must diminish, buckle, or twist to stay acceptable to another, and yet so many men and women confuse love with this very perversion. They think that love necessitates the amputation of parts of self, renouncing the voice within, surrendering to an image imposed by another. But this is not love, it is idolatry of a false idol, a worship of illusion at the cost of the living soul. Love, when it is real, does not demand the sacrifice of essence. It summons the essence forth. It invites us further into ourselves, calling on us to reveal the unvarnished and wild truth of our existence. It does not tell us softly, grow smaller so that I can love you, but says, grow to wholeness, for only then can we meet. To love truly is to realize, even subconsciously, that what is holy in the other is not his or her submission to our will, but his or her loyalty to his or her own deepest truth. Within every individual there is a center, a secret root from which all the life radiates. When we deceive this center in the quest for acceptance, the outcome is emptiness. The external relationship can hold. There are gestures of tenderness, the enactment of loyalty, but under it festers a shadow of resentment, a quiet despair. For no union that is based upon the rejection of the self can thrive in light. It is only when we stay faithful to this inner earth, not trading it for a phony love, that love is a vehicle of rebirth and not a jail. Too frequently, one thinks that to be loved is to conform, to assent, to stifle objections. What kind of relationship is this, where two masks bow to one another while the hearts within them turn cold? The meeting of masks is not union, but masquerade. True union involves risk, the risk of honesty, courage to present oneself not as the other desires, but as one is. And while this honesty may create conflict, it is a constructive conflict, one that tries, polishes, and intensifies the bond. Without it, love becomes a stagnant pool where nothing living can grow. Look at the picture of a flame. A flame cannot survive covered up under a vessel. It needs air, liberty, room to breathe. In the same manner, the human spirit is suffocated when compelled to exist under the weight of the other's expectation. However, when it is allowed space to burn intensely, not only does it light up the self, but it heats everybody who approaches. To be loved because of one's mask is to be eternally alone. To be loved because of one's true nature is to be seen. There is a paradox within love. It is the most intimate and yet the most cosmopolitan experience. When we enter into it with our real selves, we do not lose ourselves in another, nor do we stay trapped alone in the cell of ego. Instead, love indicates a point of meeting, a holy tension where two whole people stand face to face. The requirement of real love is not sacrifice yourself for me, but come fully so that I can greet you there. Without a whole self to call upon, there is no one to be loved but a shell shaped to please. And therefore, the notion that love involves the forsaking of self is not only a mistake, it is a betrayal of love itself, for it presumes that love cannot bear the burden of the truth, that it must be kept intact by falsehood and sacrifice. But love, when it exists, invites the burden of the truth. It does not grow weaker but stronger under the strain. Only the weak counterfeit of love falls apart when masks are stripped away, when you let yourself stay real, when you will not deny your depths. You bring another into a relationship that is alive. You give not a performance, but a presence. This is the only ground on which love can find root and become fruit. To offer yourself for acceptance is to sow seeds in soil that is sterile. But to stay rooted in yourself is to till a garden where both can bloom. Thus the task is not to wonder, how must I transform in order to be loved? But instead, will I continue to be whole, even if it means losing the illusion of belonging? Because belonging purchased at the expense of the soul is a non-belonging. It is home disguised as exile. But still, the reward of staying real is deep. In being true to yourself, you give permission to others to be true as well. Your authenticity serves as a reflection in which they see their own deep wells. This way, love stops being a prison and turns into a route of mutual awakening. Two souls grounded in their wholeness light each other up, not by sacrifice, but by presence, strength, and honesty. And so, love does not require you to disappear. It requires you to be present. It does not call for your quiet, but for your sound. It does not call for your reduction, but for your fullness. And it is in this fullness that love, the most human and the most divine of all things, takes on its lasting shape. When a man or woman surrenders themselves in the expectation of being loved, they do not go into love, they go into bondage. For what is left of you, after your voice has been stilled, after your wishes have been put underground, after your living flame has been quenched? You will get approval, you will get the semblance of intimacy, but in the center there is merely hollowness. A mask can be welcomed there, yet a mask is not yourself. The threat is insidious, for the sacrifice of self is sometimes mistaken as noble. We are taught from an early age that to give way, to yield, to serve eternally is to establish our value. And yet, what appears as service can be a slow death. It is the death of selfhood. The death of the soul's need to be complete. Thus, it is that people are ensnared not by dictators, but by their own dyings, need for acceptance. Love that makes you have to shrink yourself is not real. It only works as long as you stay small, compliant, unseen. And this, my friends, is not love at all. It is dependency masquerading as intimacy. You are not loved for yourself, but for how well you play the assigned role. The relationship is now drama. You perform, the other applauds, and in the midst of the applause festers a profound loneliness. The psyche will not be silenced. What is kept down rises, usually with violence. A man who suppresses his anger to maintain harmony grows bitter. A woman who suppresses her desire in order to stay good grows restless. What is kept back does not disappear. It festers in the background, insisting to be heard. And when it bursts forth, as it always does, the weak ties of false love fall apart. Understand this clearly. Love does not seek your destruction. Love seeks your presence. Love seeks your courage to bring forth the fullness of you with its light and its darkness, its strength and its vulnerability. Only then can two souls meet truly, when each has permission to be in their wholeness, unmasked and unashamed. But this frightens many of them. They fear that if they are honest, they will be loved not at all. And maybe sometimes they are right, for not all relationships are strong enough to bear truth. Some only survive because someone has promised to play small. When that promise is broken, the illusion breaks. But is this really a loss? Can it ever be a loss to trade illusion for reality, slavery for freedom? To die for love is to construct a house on sand. The waters of life will pass and the house will be overthrown. But to ground yourself in veracity in the earth of your own self, that is to construct on rock. Whatever tempests come, the rock remains. The irony is this: only when you stop sacrificing yourself do you become able to love truly. For the love that comes from a whole person, from an unbroken soul, is stronger, freer, more alive. It is no longer the grasping need of a drowning person, but the giving of a full heart. And when two such hearts come together, the connection that is formed is not dependency, but union. Imagine for a moment the myriad lives lost in silent suffering, bound to love that is maintained only by sacrifice. How many fathers swallowed their truth until they became bitter and remote? How many mothers stifled their desires until they became exhausted and cold? How many sons and daughters folded themselves into forms not their own, only to feel strange even in their own flesh? This is the still tragedy of a life devoted to love that was never actual. But the path ahead is not despair, it is awakening. The awakening occurs the instant you see that what you assumed was love was actually a transaction, your silence for the other person's comfort, your sacrifice for the illusion of belonging. That realization hurts, but it is freeing, for in that instant you are standing at the door of freedom. Ask yourself, is it not preferable to be rejected for what you are than to be accepted for what you are not? Is it not preferable to be alone in truth than to be mobbed in falsehood? For the one who courageously chooses to be whole, even loneliness is not barren. In the soul there is a richness, a plenitude, an unspoken conversation with the depths that no superficial love can equal. Do not be afraid of the breakdown of false bonds. When they break away, you do not remain desolate, you remain with yourself, and in yourself is the seed of true connection, ready to sprout. Those who can greet you in your wholeness will show up not as masters requiring your sacrifice, but as friends walking alongside you in truth. Thus, I write to defend your essence. Do not place it upon the altar of someone else's comfort. Love, indeed, but love without losing yourself. Give indeed, but give out of fullness, not hunger. The ultimate betrayal is not of someone else, but of your own soul. To live otherwise is to live in chains. To live in reality is to break them, and while the breaking hurts, what is on the other side of it is more precious than any forgery of affection, freedom, wholeness, and true love. There is a profound hurt in the contemporary soul, and it stems from the silent belief that our value needs to be bargained for in the market of relationships. Men and women too frequently think that in order to be loved, They need to muzzle the truth of who they truly are. They razor off the rough edges of their existence, hide their shadows, and buff themselves into a form that they think other people will welcome. In so doing, they alienate themselves from the very force of life within. They exchange authenticity for acceptance, wholeness for a facade, and ask themselves why love is so hollow and unfulfilling. The work of the individual is not to be acceptable to another, but to be whole to the soul. Wholeness is not perfection and certainly not a mask of goodness. It is the brave acceptance of all that we are, our dreads, our wishes, our contradictions, our failures, and our possibilities. To love oneself isn't a superficial act of self-love, but the prerequisite for any actual relationship. For how can you give another something that you've denied yourself? Only a facade, an imitation, a shadow? The journey to genuine self-esteem starts in the meeting with the shadow. Inside every one of us exists what we prefer not to acknowledge: anger, envy, vulnerability, and weakness. Most of us run from this awareness, thinking that it disqualifies us from love. But this is where the paradox comes in. When we suppress the shadow, it does not disappear. It creeps into our relationships, warping them, toxicating them, making our love conditional and tenuous. It is only by facing the shadow with honesty and heart that we can incorporate it, and in its incorporation, we give life to a self that is authentic. And it is the authentic that may be loved. Think of the one who conceals his suffering in order to be pleasant. To the world he appears calm, kind, maybe even noble. But inwardly he decays, for his unexpressed wounds scream for attention. They are afraid that by laying open these wounds they will be rejected. But the reverse is true. When they have the courage to lay themselves bare truthfully, they open up the possibility of real intimacy. For love cannot be nurtured in the compost heap of deception. It can only thrive where truth can breathe. To validate self-worth is to be yourself, not to pretend to be what you want to be. It is to know that your inconsistencies do not make you ineligible for love, but qualify it. A love that accepts only your goodness and excludes your darkness is not love. Love is an idolatry, a fragile adoration of an illusion. Real love takes the whole of being, and this love is only possible if one first accepts oneself. The biggest mistake is to think that self-acceptance results in selfishness. Rather, when an individual unites his own self, he becomes more able to truly love. The split-off soul holds on fiercely to others for wholeness outside of itself. It coerces, manipulates, and binds. But the soul that has come to terms with its own depths can give freely without chains, since it no longer fears destruction. It no longer yearns for salvation from outside, since it now finds completeness within. This wholeness is not about isolation. Rather, it prepares one for the deepest connections. When I know myself, my light and shadow, my weakness and strength, I can greet another not as a beggar, but as a friend. I do not ask them to fill me up, nor do I break myself to hold them. Rather, I am an equal, and equality is the ground where deep love can grow. There is immense courage required for this path. It is far easier to remain in the disguise of what others expect. But the price of this disguise is high. It costs us our soul. One who abandons themselves for love will find that they possess neither self nor love. They live in the half-light, never seen, never known, and ultimately never truly loved. So let us declare our value not in terms of comparison, not in terms of performance, but by the mere fact of our existence. We are valuable not because we are a fit for another's plan, but because we are. Because the flame of life has found form within us. To respect this life is the beginning of love, and from it springs all promise of true connection. When you have the courage to be whole, you present to the world a presence that is alive, real, and unmovable. And in the presence of such a soul, love stops being a transaction and becomes what it was always intended to be, an encounter of souls, each whole, each honest, and each able to see the other as they are. To draw a boundary is not merely to say no to another. It is, at its deepest, the act of saying yes to oneself. The human being does not come into the world as a formless clay waiting to be molded entirely by others. Within each of us lies an essence, a center, a pattern yearning to unfold. And yet, in the desperation to be loved, we so frequently compromise this inner truth. We bend, we shrink, we muzzle what is most vibrant in us, all in order to uphold the fiction that love can only be gained through self-denial. But a love that survives on your absence isn't love at all. It's a masquerade, a shadow marriage in which one party controls and the other fades away. When you give up yourself to uphold such relationships, you are not being devoted. You are conspiring with your own loss. You become a thespian speaking lines penned not by your heart, but by fear, anticipation, or coercion. And what does this acting get you? Best case scenario, a tentative peace. Tentative because it is founded on the interment of truth. At best, desperation, for the soul can't be silenced forever without cost. The need to annihilate oneself for love is an ancient temptation, older than myth. Recall the tales of those who sacrificed their voices, their names, their abilities, only to be taken by gods, kings, or lovers. Always the price was disastrous. For when one sacrifices the inner flame, one does not receive true intimacy. One only acquires dependence, an empty echo of closeness. To draw a boundary then is an act of courage. It is to face the terror of rejection and yet declare, I will not vanish. I will not betray myself. I will not wear the mask of obedience in order to be stroked with the counterfeit affection of others. Such a stance is not arrogance. It is fidelity to life itself. The self you defend with your boundaries is not a selfish one, but the very vehicle through which love, creativity, and meaning enter the world. This is the reason that boundaries need to be stated firmly, even if they create conflict. To the one who requires your silence, your obedience is not a request for love, but for control. And if you give in, you are complicit in their delusion, also showing them that intimacy can exist without honesty. You do not merely betray yourself, you betray them as well by affirming their lie. Reflect on the paradox. Only by risking being rejected, by being your true self, do you forge the potential for love. The one who loves you without reserve does not want the part you act, but the person you are. Without boundaries, there is no means of proving the sincerity of another's love. With them, love is filtered, refined. What is left is authentic. What is sifted out was never love to start with. There will always be internal and external voices calling to you to compromise, to dull the sharp edges of your own truth in the name of belonging. Belonging at that expense is exile from oneself. The most profound loneliness is not to lack others, but to lack one's own soul. To mark the line and to be able to say, here I stand and I will not enter into self-betrayal. This is the only road to a union that does not consume you. And so I say to you, mark the line even if your voice shakes. Tell no even if your hands quake. The world will not end, and in fact it is with this refusal that your real life starts. You will find that those who can't stand your wholeness were never going to keep your heart. You will find that the people who stay are those who want your existence, not your absence. Love is not maintained through sacrifice of essence, but through the confluence of two complete beings who will not disappear for each other. It is not about making oneself small to fit, but standing together side by side in the integrity of difference. When you respect your boundaries, you respect the mystery of your soul. And when you invite someone else into that space without giving it up, you open the door to love that is real and unbroken and alive. So keep your boundaries not as walls against love, but as gates that hold the truth of your life. Let those gates be open but never unlocked. Only in such manner can you receive the other and remain yourself. And only in such manner can you be able to say with honesty, I am loved, not for the mask which I have put on, but for the person that I am. If a man or woman thinks that he or she has to sell his or her soul so as to be loved, then he or she is trapped in the most deadly illusion. Love in its authentic form is not born from submission, nor is it nourished by the annihilation of one's essence. Love emerges from wholeness, from the meeting of two individuals who dare to stand in the truth of who they are. The tragedy of our age is that so many cling to counterfeit forms of affection, fearing that if they reveal themselves fully, they will be rejected. And yet, rejection of one's own self is so much worse than rejection by someone else. You need to comprehend the ache for love is old and profound, yet it may not be filled by imitation. If you sell your very soul for the security of fitting in, you don't gain love, you only buy a flimsy disguise which will break at the first touch of reality. The world is replete with such masks, neatly placed, wary to please, wary to not disagree, wary to find a niche. But behind each mask is a hidden despair, for the spirit knows it has been betrayed. True love is a powerful and exacting energy. It does not require you to be less but more. It invites you to unfurl the entirety of yourself, contradictions, shadows, and depths included. If you give only pieces of yourself, you withhold love from its most complete expression. For love is not an exchange of facades, it is an encounter of souls in their raw truth. That is why the call is urgent. Reject the imitation. Refuse the shadow of love that costs you your authenticity. It is not a heroic act to dull your light for someone else's ease. It is a slow suffocation. The one who makes you shrink, who calls for your silence, does not love you. They are afraid of you. They are afraid of the vastness of what you are. To continue to be bound to such false affection is to be living in prison, even as you seem to live freely. Take for a moment what it is to choose yourself. This is not an act of selfishness, though the world might judge it so. To choose yourself is to choose truth rather than illusion, wholeness rather than fragmentation, freedom rather than chains. It is to declare, I will not leave behind my depths, I will not deny the voice inside, I will not exist as a shadow of my own self. Such a statement might cost you some relationships, but it will give back to you the one thing that no other can provide, yourself. And when you stand in this truth, when you own your own wholeness, you will find that love does not disappear. Instead, it comes to you in a newness, purified, intensified, enlivened. For love does not grow where there is dishonesty. But when you come in the truth of who you are with no pretending, you open yourself to a love which beholds, which respects, which welcomes not just your light, but also your shadow. This is love as it should be, not a trade, but a union. The decision that lies before you is easy, but deep hold on to the comfortable chains of false belonging, or step fearlessly into the liberty of true love. The first will give you security, but it is the security of a prison. The second will ask of you courage, but it is the courage that results in life. The choice does not belong to someone else. It belongs to you in the loneliness of your own heart. Remind yourself, what am I willing to sacrifice in order to be loved? If the answer is your truth, your wholeness, your very self, then remember that you are not opting for love. You are opting for exile from your own being. But if you commit to the fact that nothing is worth betraying your depths, then you have already set foot on the way of freedom. This is the call: shatter the illusion, rip away the mask, and hold fast in the light of who you truly are. Do not accept shallow affection or artificial connection. Do not weaken your flame to ease the eyes of those who would be dazzled by its light. Let your fire burn the way it was meant to burn, and invite only those who can handle its light to stand with you. The world so desperately needs such a soul, men and women who will not be shadows, who will not be afraid to live whole. When you choose yourself, you invite others to do the same. Your authenticity is a beacon, your bravery a spark in the life of someone still living in silence. So I encourage you, do not wait for permission. Do not delay the choice. The moment to take yourself back is now. Choose freedom, choose completeness, choose yourself.